Fire Lover, A True Story, is a true crime book written by Joseph Wambaugh in 2002, focusing on the life and arson crimes of John Orr. In Fire Lover, Joseph Wambaugh used his experience as an LAPD officer to write about these crimes. Joseph Wambaugh is a best-selling American writer known for his fictional and non-fictional accounts of police work in the United States, and many of his novels are set in Los Angeles. He has won 3 Edgar Awards and was named a Grand Master by the Mystery Writers of America. After receiving an Associates of Arts degree from Chaffey College, he joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 1960 and served for 14 years, rising from patrolman to detective sergeant. He also earned a BA and MA degrees in Cal State Los Angeles. I am Teresa, and welcome to the Canvas and Crime Chronicles. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be alerted every time I upload a new video. John Leonard Orr was born on April 26, 1949 in Los Angeles, California, and grew up in the shadow of Hollywood, though his life would take a far darker turn. His early life was relatively unremarkable, but it laid a foundation for his later criminal activities. Orr's father was a soldier who served in World War II, and his mother was a homemaker. After the war, the family settled in the Los Angeles area. Orr's childhood was reportedly stable, though not particularly close-knit. His parents divorced when he was young, which was a significant event in his life, and it was believed to have been a lasting impact on him. Because of his somewhat unstable upbringing, Orr's early adult years were marked by a desire for excitement and authority. He initially tried to join the Los Angeles Police Department but was not accepted, which was a blow to his ego. Instead, Orr joined the Air Force, serving as a military police officer, which trained him with the discipline that he would later use in his career as an arson investigator. Orr's fascination with fire seemed to start in his youth. There were reports that he was obsessed with fires and firefighting from a very young age, though it is not clear whether this was evident to those around him at the time. After his military service, Orr pursued a career in firefighting, which allowed him to indulge his interest in fire while also gaining access to the tools and knowledge he would later use as an arson investigator and eventually for his arson crimes. His early life, combined with his later frustrations and his unmet quest to be a police officer, contributed to the development of his dangerous and disturbed man who would go on to become one of the most notorious arsonists in American history. Orr's personal life was a paradox. From the outside, he was a dedicated firefighter and family man, but underneath, he was deeply troubled. His obsession with fire and his need for control and power over others drove him to commit heinous crimes. Orr was known to be meticulous and controlling, traits that were evident in both his professional life as an arson investigator and in his personal relationships. Despite his dark tendencies, Orr was able to maintain a facade of normalcy for many years. He was well liked by many of his colleagues and was considered an expert in his field, which only added to the shock when his true nature was revealed. Orr's personal life and relationships were ultimately overshadowed by his criminal activities, leading to a tragic and destructive legacy that affected not only his victims, but also those closest to him. John Orr was married twice. His first marriage was to Carolyn Krause in 1971. They had 2 children together, a son and a daughter. His son Christopher and his daughter Lori were largely kept out of the spotlight following his arrest and conviction. Orr's actions as an arsonist and the resulting media attention had a profound impact on his family, leading to a life of relative anonymity for his children, who have distanced themselves from their father's legacy. His marriage to Carolyn eventually ended in divorce, and it has been suggested that Orr's obsessive behavior and his growing fascination with fire played a role in the breakdown of his relationship. After his divorce from Carolyn, Orr married his second wife, Wanda Anderson, in 1977. Wanda was a nurse, and their marriage was relatively stable in the early years. However, as Orr's criminal activities escalated, the strain on their relationship became too much. Wanda eventually divorced him as well, unable to cope with his erratic behavior and the suspicions that began to surround him. John Orr's work history is closely tied to his eventual criminal activities as an arsonist, with a career that spanned law enforcement and firefighting. Orr served in the United States Air Force as military police officer. This role provided him with the discipline and training and exposure to law enforcement, which would later influence his career path. Orr also attempted law enforcement career by initially aspiring to join the Los Angeles Police Department, but he was not accepted. This rejection was a significant blow to his ambitions. After this setback, he briefly worked as a security guard, which was an unsatisfying role for someone with Orr's aspirations. Orr eventually found his calling in firefighting, joining the Los Angeles Fire Department in the mid-1970s. His time as a firefighter provided him with the knowledge and skills that would later aid in his criminal activities. Orr's most significant and infamous role was with the Glendale Fire Department, where he became an arson investigator in 1981. Orr was tasked with investigating fires, determining their causes, and identifying potential arsonists. He quickly gained a reputation as an expert in his field, often being called upon to assist with complex cases. As an arson investigator, Orr was known for his meticulous and thorough work. Ironically, he was often the first one on the scene of fires. This allowed him to control the investigation and steer suspicion away from himself. His colleagues considered him highly knowledgeable, and he even conducted seminars and training sessions on arson investigation, further cementing his reputation as an expert. However, it wasn't until much later that everyone realized he was the first one on the scene to the fires that he himself had set. Orr also pursued writing, channeling his fascination with fire into fiction. He wrote a novel titled Points of Origin, which was loosely based on his experiences and contained details eerily similar to the fires he was later convicted of setting. The novel was never published, but became a key piece of evidence in his eventual trial, as it revealed his mindset and the depth of his obsession with fire. Points of Origin became a sort of journal for the fires that Orr was accused of setting. While working as an arson investigator, Orr began setting fires across Southern California, many of which resulted in significant property damage, injuries, and even deaths. His role as an arson investigator allowed him to stay one step ahead of the authorities, and he used his insider knowledge to evade capture for many years. He was finally arrested in 1991 after a lengthy investigation, and his work history played a crucial role in the investigation and eventual prosecution. Orr's work history is a chilling example of how someone in a position of trust and authority can exploit their role for criminal purposes. His double identity as a firefighter and investigator and arsonist made him one of the most notorious figures in the history of arson in the United States. John Orr's crimes as a serial arsonist spanned more than a decade, during which he set numerous fires across Southern California. Orr's most infamous crime occurred at a South Pasadena hardware store called Olds Home Center on October 10, 1984. Orr set a fire in the store that killed 4 people, including a 2-year-old child. The fire spread quickly, and due to its intensity, investigators initially struggled to determine the cause. This tragic event became one of the key incidents in the investigation that eventually led to Orr's arrest. There are a series of arsons across Southern California from 1984 to 1991. Orr set dozens of fires, mainly in the Los Angeles area, but also in other parts of Southern California. His targets included retail stores, fabric shops, and other commercial buildings, often during times when the fires would cause maximum damage but minimal loss of life, although this was not always the case. Many of the fires occurred in the Glendale area, where he worked as an arson investigator, allowing him to respond quickly and control the scene and the investigation. In 1987, Orr was linked to a series of fires in Bakersville, California. One notable fire was set at a craft store where Orr used a homemade incendiary device consisting of a cigarette, matches, and paper. The fire caused extensive damage, but thankfully did not result in any deaths. On October 26, 1989, Orr set fire to a fabric store in Fresno, California, known as the Sequel Fire, using a similar incendiary device as in the craft store. The fire was significant, but again, there were no fatalities. Points of Origin was written in 1990 but never published. Points of Origin included detailed fictional fires that closely resembled those he had set in real life. The manuscript would later be used as evidence against Orr, as it contained explicit descriptions of fires that mirrored his actual crimes. By the early 1990s into 1991, investigators began to suspect that a firefighter or arson investigator might be responsible for the string of arsons. Orr became a suspect due to the pattern of fires that seemed to occur when he was nearby or involved in an investigation. Orr's eventual capture, trial, and punishment are a critical part of his story as one of the most notorious serial arsonists in U.S. history. Suspicion began to grow with the pattern of fires that was being created. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, investigators began noticing a pattern of the fires across Southern California. Many of these fires were similar in nature, involving incendiary devices made from common materials like cigarettes, matches, and paper. The fires often occurred at locations where Orr was present or shortly after he had been there, leading to suspicions that the arsonist might be someone within the firefighting or law enforcement community. The task force investigating the string of arsons developed a profile suggesting that the arsonist might be a firefighter or arson investigator with an extensive knowledge of fire behavior and firefighting tactics. This profile eventually pointed to Orr, who fit the description perfectly. A major breakthrough came when a partial fingerprint was recovered from a piece of notebook paper used as part of an incendiary device found at the scene of a fire. The fingerprint matched John Orr's, which was a crucial piece of evidence linking him directly to one of the arson scenes. Once Orr became a prime suspect, investigators began monitoring his movements closely. They noticed that fires tended to break out in locations where Orr was attending arson investigator conferences or traveling, further reinforcing the belief that he was the perpetrator. It was learned in 1991 that coincidentally Orr had attended conferences in Fresno and Bakersfield where fires broke out in locations near where he stayed. This further increased suspicion as the fires mirrored the types of arsons Orr was known to investigate. During the investigation, law enforcement discovered Orr's unpublished novel, Points of Origin. The book described a character who set fires in a manner strikingly similar to the real-life arsons Orr was suspected of committing. The book became a key piece of evidence, showing not only Orr's obsession with the fire, but also his detailed knowledge of the crimes. Orr was eventually arrested on December 4, 1991, after investigators found incriminating evidence, including matches and cigarettes that matched those used in the arson devices. His novel also served as a key piece of evidence linking him to the crimes. Orr was arrested and initially charged with multiple counts of arson. The most significant charges were related to the 1984 South Pasadena fire at Old Home Center, which resulted in the deaths of 4 people. He was also charged with numerous other arsons that had caused extensive property damage. Orr's state trial focused primarily on the charges related to the South Pasadena fire. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including the fingerprint match, his proximity to the fires, the incendiary devices found at multiple scenes, and excerpts from his novel. The trial drew significant media attention, given the shocking nature of the crimes and Orr's position as a trusted public servant. Orr was convicted in 1992 of 4 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of arson. The jury found that Orr had deliberately set the fire at Old Home Center, knowing it could result in loss of life. The prosecution argued successfully that Orr's actions were premeditated and driven by a deep-seated obsession with fire. In 1993, Orr was initially convicted of multiple counts of arson and 4 counts of murder related to the 1984 South Pasadena fire. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge in the case described Orr's crimes as particularly heinous and noted that he had betrayed the public trust in a profound way. Further federal investigations and convictions from 1998 to 2002 led to Orr later being convicted of additional arsons in federal court, leading to further sentences that effectively ensured he would never be released from prison. Even after his conviction, law enforcement agencies continued to investigate Orr's possible involvement in other unsolved fires. Some estimates suggest he may have been responsible for as many as 2,000 fires, though the exact number remains unknown. John Orr is serving a life sentence at a federal correctional facility. He continues to maintain his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Orr's case remains a chilling example of how someone in a position of trust can abuse their power for criminal purposes. His actions had devastating consequences for his victims, their families, his family, and the communities he terrorized. His story has been the subject of several books, documentaries, and a made-for-TV movie titled Point of Origin, based on his crimes. Orr's capture, trial, and punishment brought an end to a terrifying chapter of arson in Southern California. His crimes left a lasting impact on the communities he terrorized, and his case remains one of the most shocking examples of a public servant betraying the trust placed in him by the public. The impact of his crimes continues to be felt by those affected. Thank you for listening to another episode of Canvas and Crime. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if there is a story you would like to look into and recap, drop it in the comments. I avoid over-sensationalized serial killers and the overly popular stories. But feel free to offer suggestions, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be alerted every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching and listening.